Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Just wait for live streaming also.
Oh, hi Ashok. You're there.
Hi.
So I have started that.
Yeah, okay. Start.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I welcome you to the Day 2 proceedings of the 14th All India Conference of China Studies, organized by the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi, in collaboration with China Bhavan, Vishwa Bharati University, and in partnership with the India office of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung. We shall now begin the proceedings of Thematic Panel 2. The theme of this panel is International Trade and Foreign Policy. Chairing this session is Professor Alka Acharya, Professor at the Center for East Asian Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and Honorary Fellow and former Director of the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. The speakers in this panel include Ms. Sunaina Bose, who has a Master's in Development Studies from the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, and who is a Research Associate at the Museum of Art and Photography, Bengaluru. She'll be speaking on the topic, Turning the Gaze, Understanding the Deployment of the Debt-Trap Narrative in Western Media. Next, we have Ms. Shri Jain, UGC Junior Research Fellow at the Symbiosis School of International Studies, Symbiosis International University, Pune, and Sukalpa Chakravarti, Associate Professor and Deputy Director at the Symbiosis School of International Studies, Symbiosis International University, Pune. The paper is titled The Dualistic Trends of Sinophobia and Sinophilia, Impact on Foreign Policy Towards China. The next presentation will be by Rahul Nath Chaudhary, Research Fellow, Indian Council of World Affairs, New Delhi, and Praveen Jadhav, Assistant Professor at Institute of Infrastructure Technology, Research and Management, Ahmedabad, who will be presenting on the topic, Capturing the Growth of Chinese Investment in India. And the final presentation will be by Dr. Mani Tantri, Assistant Professor, Center for Economic Studies and Policy, Institute for Social and Economic Change, Bengaluru, and Dr. Varadurga Bhatt, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, Christ University, Bengaluru, who will be presenting on the topic, Pollution-Intensive Products in India's Bilateral Trade with China. To lead the discussion, we have with us Dr. Jabinti Jacob, Associate Professor, Department of International Relations and Governance Studies, Shivnari University, and Adjunct Research Fellow at National Maritime Foundation, New Delhi, and Dr. G. Venkatraman, Associate Professor at the Indian Institute of Management, Indore, and Adjunct Fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, New Delhi. Before I invite the chair to begin the proceedings, let me lay out the housekeeping rules. All participants except the speakers will be muted for the duration of the event. Participants are requested to send in their queries via the chat box or use the raise hand option. Please unmute yourself only when called upon to do so by the chair. I will now invite the chair to begin the proceedings. Over to you, ma'am.
Thanks, Rija. So a very, very good morning to all of you, and Kachia Hao. And let's, without further ado, since everybody has been introduced, the panel has been put before you, let's get straight away into the session, a very, very significant session, International Trade and Foreign Policy. It goes without saying that a country's external trade has always been a major factor in the way its foreign policy has shaped. And way back in the 70s, it was Rosena who said that foreign policy had ceased to stop at the water's edge, primarily because of the way in which the external factors had started to really determine many of the ideas and policies. So this linkage between international trade and foreign policy has become even more intensified in the era of globalization. And I don't think I would be exaggerating if I would say that international relations are on the cusp of a tremendous metamorphosis, both on account of the fact that there is a huge flux in the way international trade has started to operate, the new challenges which are actually going to bring about a huge change, particularly climate change and energy security, how they are going to make countries rethink the way in which they have been developing and therefore engaging with the other world. So I think the factors are tremendously complex. I hope our young panelists will help us engage with the issues that they have raised in their papers in a much more comprehensive fashion. So let me then request, who's the first?
Sunaina Bose.
Oh,
We'll
okay.
go with Sunaina Bose.
Sunaina, so please, you know the rules, and let's start. I just final word. I will have to interrupt at 8 minutes to tell you that you've got 2 more minutes to wrap up. So please try and keep within 10 minutes so that we can have some time for question answers. So Sunaina, your time starts now.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen quickly. Hi, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. I'm Sunaina, and I'm going to be presenting on the debt trap diplomacy narrative. I became interested in this question back in 2018 when I was doing a project with ICS. And since then, I've quite closely engaged with how the debt trap diplomacy narrative has been manufactured and deployed in Western media. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the background. We know that under the Xi Jinping presidency, China has become an emerging center for infrastructure building and finance, especially after the Belt and Road Initiative was announced and the AIIB was established in 2015. And we also know that this is the kind of, I can't seem to. Okay, I'm just going to go for it. The kind of response that Chinese lending practices has received in Western media has been overarchingly negative. And a lot of this criticism and hesitancy around Chinese lending practices is captured in this catch-all phrase called debt trap diplomacy. So what my paper is about is not really examining the truth value of such claims or examination of whether the Chinese state is supporting unsustainable projects and leading countries into debt distress, but really looking at the discourse itself and looking at where it all began, how it's manufactured, sustained, and deployed in a manner which is so pervasive in our current imagination of Chinese infrastructure projects in general. What are the sutures and discontinuities that appear when we look at the narrative up close? And to do this, I've used a critical discourse analysis method, which draws heavily from the works of Michel Foucault. In Foucault's works, discourses are tools that are used to legitimize the action of the state in an industrialized or neoliberal economy. And these are a part of a larger knowledge complex that are effectively embedded within power structures. So the term debt trap diplomacy was coined in 2017 by an Indian political strategist, Brahmachalini. His work on Chinese lending practices have guided our understanding of how we understand the term debt trap diplomacy. He argues that China extends unsustainable loans to vulnerable economies that are located in geographies that are aligned with China's geopolitical interests. He further argues that China uses the Belt and Road and debt trap diplomacy in general to export its excess capacity, tap into the natural resources of these economies, and find markets for its low-quality manufactured goods, possibly also militarizing these built infrastructures. Following this, in 2017, his work came out, and in 2018, Belfer Center at Harvard Kennedy School released a paper along similar lines, a report titled Debt Book Diplomacy, which argues that China employs this debt strategy to gain leverage over 3 areas. The first is the Indian Ocean region, for which it coined the term string of pearls, which has now become very popular, South China Sea, and Pacific region, all 3 of which have traditionally been under the ambit of the US Navy. So both of these works, Brahmacharya as well as the Belfer Center work, were a direct response to the Hambantota port case. Now, this highly publicized and very often discussed case was reported in a very peculiar manner in Western media. The case itself was reported through a mix of long-form opinion pieces, graphic explainers, short reports, videos, and much more. And it's very common to find contradictory claims about the deal within the same publication. Some publications call it both a debt equity swap as well as an asset seizure, often in the same article. Now, this kind of contradictory reporting is also supported by the opacity of the deal itself. However, through the repeated act of narrating facts about the case with differing levels of clarity and detail, in addition to relying on sources like hearsay, leaked cables, comparisons to biblical narratives like David and Goliath, it has allowed the case to be imagined in an already existing and familiar trope. This has effectively made the Hambantota port case into an urban legend, always referred to in context of predatory nature of Chinese lending practices. And this led me to think that it's quite similar to how Branwyn conceptualizes his urban legends, in which he says that stories are set in contemporary time, circulated through mass media, gain traction for their sensationalism, and continuously provide an ability to prove as a moral or become a cautionary tale, which is exactly what the Hambantota port case served between the reportage of 2017 and 2019. In 2019, there was a change in how the case was being reported. A lot of news publications, and I'm going to name New York Times and The Atlantic in particular, started publishing myth-busting articles or counter-arguments to their previous articles. Now, most of these were written by Professor Deborah Brottingham of Johns Hopkins University, and the ones that were not written by her often do cite her work, the work of Lowy Institute, and a report that the Rhodium Group published, which points mainly to a feasibility report conducted by Canada on the port, which gave the Rajapaksa government a get-go, the larger Eurobond debt that Sri Lanka is under, and the historic role of the IMF and the World Bank in creating conditions of debt distress for developing economies in the global south. What this tells us is that Western media rarely operates as a monolith, and it's not useful to think of it as a group that acts with any kind of cohesion, even in cases where there's an overarching agreement, a bipartisan consensus in America. While this assorted reportage has resulted in manufacturing this discourse, what interests me more is the complex and overlapping network of think tanks, academics, policymakers, political representatives who employ the media to talk to each other as much as they talk to the people reading these reports. And the further research on implications of such a nexus would make for very interesting research, I think. So what this debt trap narrative does basically is reify the position of the United States as the leader of the free world, responsible for underwriting free, fair, and transparent foreign trade and investment, protecting the sovereign rights of developing economies and marginalized communities, not only in its own countries, but across the world. So debt trap diplomacy reinforces the idea that development economies development economics and especially through interventions in infrastructure is originally an American export. And China is a fairly recent player. So like phrases like new scramble for Africa, etc. come under these. Although we should note that China was involved in the construction of the Tazara rail network in the 70s. Repeated calls for US participations in China-led institutions and initiatives to keep it free and fair reinforces the idea that the United States underwrites most of the laws in our current liberal world order. And also the media is very effectively able to make the argument of how China can possibly use this closer ties to developing economies in Asia, Africa, Latin America, and Pacific Islands to gain legitimacy for its treatment of populations in Xinjiang, in Hong Kong, in Taiwan, and Tibet. So I'm just going to...
8 minutes are up.
Yeah, I'm just going to conclude quickly. The debt trap diplomacy narrative, when you look at it up close, a critical reading of this narrative effectively posits the peaceful rise of China as oppositional to the status quo of the existing international state system. And there is a latent emphasis on the goodwill or humaneness of the American-led liberal world order, reifying the need for Western-led multilateral institutions to exist, and if not exist, at least participate in this new world order that China is building. Yeah, that's it. I'm done.
Okay, thanks. I think that was really a very, very thoughtful, thought-provoking paper. Sunaina, you brought out the core of this entire debate on debt trap diplomacy, particularly the issues that are involved in discourse construction and the kind of vested interests that push a certain kind of a discourse vis-a-vis another discourse. So while we have a certain reality, which is the David and Goliath, I mean, this is huge China dealing with these small countries. And so obviously there is going to be a different dynamic there. On the other hand, so between the discourse that is being generated at one end and the actual reality falls the shadow. I think you've tried to put some light on that shadow, and it'll be interesting to see how people take this up. Okay, the next we have is Shri Jain.
Yes, ma'am.
Come on, your time begins now.
Okay. Thank you, ICS, for giving me this opportunity. Today, I am presenting the research article titled The Dualistic Trends of Sinophobia and Sinophilia and its Impact on Foreign Relations with China. I have written this article with my co-author, Dr. Sukalpa Chakravarti. Let's begin. Niccolo Machiavelli said that a king should be both loved and feared. And today, the People's Republic of China, who aspires to rule the world, invites both fear and criticism as well as love and admiration. This research paper highlights the dualistic trends of public opinion of China, the Sinophobia, that is fear and dislike for China, and Sinophilia, that is love and admiration for Chinese culture and civilization. We referred to numerous global attitude surveys and public opinion polls to gauge the trends of public opinion of China in different countries. In this current information age, as public opinion becomes more and more assertive and active with deep penetration of print and social media, its influence and significance is getting stronger in exerting influence on interstate economic and political exchanges. Research and empirical evidence has shown that governments do respond to strong public opinion of their country in matters of foreign policy. The purpose of this research was to illustrate with multiple examples that how public opinion of China, be it negative or positive, can impact policy preferences towards China. And at the same time, how existing political and economic relations with China could influence the public opinion in the host countries. Let's discuss these one by one. Looking at the multiple causes or factors generating fear, anxiety, or distrust towards China, the first one that comes into mind is China's authoritarian system and its human rights record. The Sinophone Borderlands Project 2020 showed how liberal democracies of Europe considered China a threat to democracy. Similarly, the Asian Student Survey data has consistently shown that people with strong democratic values do not consider China an ally. Given the reports of human rights abuses in Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, we saw that Human Rights Watch Report 2021 called China to be in the darkest period for human rights. The Hong Kong movement got support from people across the world, and many governments responded to public demands. Meanwhile, the most recent expression of fear and hate towards China was witnessed during this COVID-19 pandemic. It was not just a health crisis, but also an economic crisis, a psychological and social hazard. The Pew Research Survey showed that 61% of respondents blamed China for COVID pandemic. Thousands of cases of verbal and physical abuse against ethnic Chinese were reported across the globe. Even in the cyberspace, the abuse and stigma against China and its people skyrocketed up to 900%. Online posts and tweets were flooded with use of hashtag Kung Fu, hashtag communist virus. Basically, the pandemic showed the different ways China is feared today. Coming to the third most important factor contributing to Sinophobia, you must all be familiar with this picture. It's a Chinatown. Chinatowns are enclaves for Chinese people. Well, it can be found in different cities of US, UK, Canada, Australia, South Africa. However, these are not voluntary settlements, but results of history of Chinese exclusion acts in these countries. The fear of Chinese being a threat to Western civilization is centuries old. Not to mention that Chinese are facing similar kind of host bias in African countries too. where with increasing trade and investment links with China, there is mushrooming presence of Chinese companies, Chinese traders, migrant families. This is bringing insecurities of job, resources, and opportunities for the local populace. Resultantly, the incidents of violence against Chinese traders and anti-Chinese demonstrations are increasing in number. The 2018 riots in Zambia, the recent protests by Namibian workers is just to name a few. Consequently, many states are making now stricter laws to curtail the negative impact of Chinese. Similar trends of anti-Chinese sentiments are reported in countries of South America, Southeast Asia, or Central Asian republics, where Chinese companies are increasing their foothold and Chinese migrants are increasing in number. However, while there are reasons to criticize China, there are also reasons to admire China. And one of the biggest reasons is China's phenomenal economic success. The Asian Barometer Survey and Asian Student Survey shows that China's economy is its biggest attraction, offering many opportunities. Today, both the developed economies of Europe and poor economies of Africa consider economic partnership with China an opportunity. And yes, how can we forget the demand and popularity of Chinese brands and electronics and apps? Most of us use Chinese products on daily basis. Well, besides its economic attraction, it is China's unique culture that charms people across the globe. The Soft Power 30 Index calls China a cultural juggernaut and ranks it at the 8th position in cultural sub-index. The World Economic Forum report, the Google report, all highlight how there is increasing appeal for tourism in China. As per the Euromonitor International, China will soon surpass France to be the most popular destination. The reasons are China's century-old heritage sites, its sacred sites of Buddhism and Taoism, Chinese food, Chinese martial art, and not to mention that China's spectacular socio-economic growth, its high-speed railways, expressways, and world-class commercial tourism facilities that makes it easier for world tourists to access, admire, and appreciate Chinese culture all the more. Talking about Mandarin, there are about 6.8 official Mandarin test takers annually, including myself. Why? Not just because I'm doing research on China, but also because it's considered the language of future. Worldwide, experts, politicians, and business entrepreneurs call it a language that opens multiple opportunities and gateways to commercial success. Today, Mandarin is revered like traditional French or German languages. And it's increasingly being taught, not just in poor economies of Nepal or Zimbabwe, but also in developed countries like UK and US. The CCP's flagship program of Confucian Center can be contributed or attributed for this leapfrog growth. Coming to the third and final section of this paper, the correlation between China's bilateral relations and public opinion of China. This slide shows the contradictory yet concurrent trends of public opinion of China. The left one is Pew Research Survey, which shows unprecedented rise in unfavorable views of China, especially in Western democracies. And the right one shows the Soft Power 30 Index, showing high ranking of China in subsectors of culture and engagement. These and many other public opinion polls were taken into account to understand the current trends of public opinion of China. And it was found that there is a stimulate response kind of relationship between public opinion of China and government policy responses towards China. Let me give you a few examples. UK was the country that supported and membered China's biggest initiatives like Asian Infrastructure and Investment Bank and BRI. However, 2019 Hong Kong protests followed by the pandemic triggered much public anger in UK. The YouGov polls showed that 60% of the Britons considered China a force for bad, and majority blamed it for the pandemic, calling their government to take strict action against China. The UK governments not just suspended the Hong Kong extradition treaty, but also took a U-turn on Huawei 5G network deal with China. Even in multicultural societies like Australia, where Chinese make up to 5.6% of the total population, saw 1 in 5 Chinese facing racial abuse during the pandemic. The Lowy Institute survey report showed how with deteriorating economic and political relations with China, there is parallel increase in hate and discrimination towards Chinese Australians. Similarly, the US trade war and diplomatic clashes reflected an increasing negative public view of China. 73% of Americans hold anti-Chinese sentiments today. Moreover, 89% of them consider China as their enemy. Meanwhile, in India, we also that public anger post-India-China border clash made government to take the historic step of banning Chinese apps. However, while some states had contempt and disdain against China, others had reasons to admire it. The friendship between Italy and China reached a new height when China came with the timely COVID assistance, especially when neither EU nor US came forward to help. China got a big image boost in Italian public and Italian government. China's economic partnership and its cultural soft power gives it a big economic and political clout and a benevolent image in Asian neighbors. For instance, in recent survey in Pakistan, 72% of the respondents credited China for the socio-economic transformation of their country. Well,
your time is up, unfortunately.
I will just conclude, ma'am.
Yeah, so just take 30 seconds to conclude, please.
Yes. While liberal democracies, we found in this study that liberal democracies, public opinion is stronger in having influence on foreign policy, but it is not so in poor and African and Asian economies. But economic partnership with China is priority for all. However, China should not forget that it is a complex interdependent world and China needs support of other people. So it must recognize the significance of public opinion and turn the international public opinion in its favor by boosting its soft power efforts. Thank you.
Thanks, Shri and Sukalpa. My apologies. I got so engrossed in your presentation that I completely forgot to warn you at 8 minutes. But I think both Sunaina and your papers both really are very interesting explorations of highly contemporary, dynamic, current kind of issues related to China, but placed in a conceptual framework. And that helps you actually negotiate the imperatives of, the immediate kind of reactions and responses. However, one thing that comes out from your Shri and Sukalpa's paper, which I thought could be looked at, while you have explained that between the perception at one end and the policy, that so positive perceptions lead to greater engagement, negative perceptions lead to negative policies. I think a distinction should be made between the impact on, say, policy at one level. So, for instance, in India, the anger led to banning of the apps, or the UK or Australia, so you do see policy changes as a kind of an immediate response to some negative public opinion. But does that fundamentally change strategy towards the country? In other words, how does a negative perception, negative public opinion actually contribute to a changing of strategy, or does it not? So I think this is something that could be usefully looked at. But thank you very much for at least bringing out the need to eschew black and white kind of framing, that we need to unpack some of these phrases and some of these descriptions and some of these assessments that are completely swamping our discourse currently, unpack them and actually look at how they are far more nuanced than simple framing suggests. So thank you very much. And now we have Rahul.
Yeah.
Okay. Come in now.
Thank you. Shall I start now?
This is also a joint paper written by Rahul and Praveen. So let's hear you now.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Can you increase your volume?
I think this is my...
Yeah. Okay. Better.
Is it okay now, ma'am?
Yes, yes,
Yes,
much
yes.
better, much better.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers of of this present conference to give us an opportunity to present our paper. Let me first share my screen quickly. Uh, 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 can you see this? Hello, can you see this?
Yes, yes,
My
we can.
okay, okay,
It's
okay.
starting. Yeah.
So as the title of our paper suggests, that in this paper we'll be dealing with Chinese investment in India. And as you all know, that there has been a exponential growth in Chinese investment in India in the last few years, especially after 2010. So DPIIT, or which tracks actually the foreign direct investment in India, uh, reports that around which the total foreign direct investment in India, which was around 1 million US dollar in 2010, has increased to 173 million USD in 2019. And for the foreign portfolio investment, or FPI, which is around 10, which India received around 10 billion FPI from China for the last 10 years, and the total investment in only in 2019 was 3,420 million, around, that is more than 3 billion US dollars. The Chinese investment in India has come to the almost all the sectors of the economy, with education, tourism, hotels, industry, construction, automobiles, everywhere they have invested. And along with the investment, there has been also a huge flow of bilateral trade between these two countries. Bilateral trade between two countries, which was only around 58 billion in 2010, had increased to 85 billion in 2019. But in 2020, when there is pandemic and it's affected our bilateral trade with China also, and it reduced to around 44 billion. But it again in 2021, our bilateral trade with China increased exponentially, and China became the second largest, the first, the largest trading partner of India, bilateral trading partner of India. So now, in only for the last 6 months, we have traded around 2 billion, or around 57 billion US dollar in the last first 6 months of the calendar year 2021. So and all this economic development with China is taking place at a time when we are not having that so good diplomatic or strategic relationship with China. And there are some clashes in the borders, especially Doklam and Galwan Valley in the last few years. So and but the economic and trade relationship are flourishing with China. So what that arises the question, why Chinese are investing so much in India? Why when we are not having that much of good terms? So and that leads to the basic, or the main objective of our study, that why China. We want to find out in this study. We wanted to find out what is the nature of Chinese investment, what kind of investment they are doing, what is mainly share market kind of investment, that is portfolio investment, or direct investments, and what is the total volume of investment, what is the quantity of investment. And there is also a suspicion about Chinese investment around the world, especially after this Hambantota port incidents in Sri Lanka. After that, many countries have started looking into Chinese investment with some kind of suspicion. Many have stalled their program with Chinese investments. So these are the main three objectives for a study that we'd like to attempt in our paper. But I am this presentation, I would like to skip this suspicion part of this Chinese investment, because my earlier presenters have focused on this issue like debt trap and all. So I'd like to skip this thing, and I'll focus on the first part of this presentation, or the objective of the objective of the study. So if we look into the Chinese data, that Indian trend of the Chinese investment in India, we find that Chinese investment has started increasing mainly after 2010. If you look into this graph, so we can see that there is an upward trend in Chinese investment, especially after 2010, and it rose to more than it's around 8 billion in 2015, and then it came down, but it settled and last year, that is 2020, there was little dip in the data because of the COVID and all. So, but the absolute volume of the data remains quite high for in Chinese investment. That is Chinese investment to India. On what is it? So this is the trend of portfolio investment in India. So this is not FDI, this is portfolio investment in India. And so it trends around from 2014. If you see they have invested around in 2017, they reached the highest volume of around 1600 million, and still it remains to be very high. And it is compared to, if we also compare Chinese portfolio investment in India with other developed countries like USA or European countries, we find Chinese investment is much higher than these other developed countries. So what are the sectors that this Chinese investment has come? So these are the three major investors in Indian economy, and these are the sectors. If we look into the sectors, we find that almost all these sectors have been covered by the Chinese investments. And these are not the total investment. This is just the three of the biggest investors in India: Tencent, Alibaba, and Xiaomi. So these are basically, Tencent is basically the venture capitalist fund, and Xiaomi is a mobile company. And so what is so if so much of investment is coming, so what is the sector? The question arises, what is the factor that is actually influencing Chinese investor to invest in India? To dig into this issue, we conducted conducted extensive literature survey and try to find out what are the factors those things. So we identified around five issues there, or five factors that actually affect the any investment in the country. So it's like business freedom, this 5 words: business freedom, trade freedom, financial freedom, fiscal and investment freedom. So these are basically I'll not go into the details of these indices. These freedoms that I'm talking about, business freedom, trade freedom, these are basically composite indices, and this is published annually by Heritage Foundation USA. So this actually captures some kind of the freedom or the relaxation that any foreign company enjoys in a country when they invest in that particular country. So in these things, we to make an econometric modeling, we model these things. The Chinese investment depends upon the dependent variable depends upon these five variables, like fiscal freedom, all these five variables that I just talked. So, and we captured the data for this analysis from 2010 to 2020. 2010 we selected because the investment has increased, especially after the 2010. I've also shown the same thing in the graph where data started increasing. The Chinese investment started picking up since 2010. Before that, there was not that much investment. Total investment before 2010 was even less than a billion, $1 million US before 2010. So it's mainly increased after 2010. So we have, this is the basic justification of capturing 2010 to 2020 data. So when we apply this model, and we apply basically SUR model. SUR, this is seemingly unregulated regression model. So in this model, when we run those regression, after applying the data for these five freedom indices, our results and the result that we find from this analysis is that there is this business freedom and this slide. So the business freedom and trade freedom and investment freedom, these three factors have been instrumental in attracting Chinese investment in India. Apart from this freedom, there are other factors also that Chinese investors feel that these are the factors that will help them to do their business. India is a big market of around 1.3 billion, and with a mobile penetration of more than 70% people, we have a tech-savvy population. So doing this business in a technology-based sector, as you know, that most of the Chinese investment has come primarily to the technology-based companies like
Sorry, Rahul. 8 minutes are up, so if you
Just
can-
give me a minute to
Yeah.
wrap it up. Most this Chinese investment which are in the technology sector, that is easier for them to do business in technology-based sectors. Around there's a global, India has a increasing stock market. So when they basically invest in this growing market so that they can make more and more profit. This is basic. These are not basically companies that they are not primarily producing anything or this thing. They are investing their money in a portfolios fund, and then they exit with the higher profit. So these Chinese investments are coming basically to earn higher profit as Indian market is growing, and India is a large startup ecosystem in India, and they are investing in the startup firms so that they can earn a lot of extraordinary or windfall profit that we call in economics the windfall profit. So this is their basic these things. But yes, there are some other factors also, which is mainly any investor who is coming to or investing anywhere this big, so basically because of the profit motive and the bigger market that always help to multiply their investment, multiply their profit. So yeah, these are the basic findings of the study, and I'll skip the suspicion part of this presentation because of the time. Suspicion why Chinese people are, why Chinese investment across the world are looked into with a viewed as a with suspicion. The people have different countries have different views on Chinese investment, that they have debt trap, they have they will capture the critical resources in their country after when they will not be able to repay the loan. So all these things have been covered on the earlier paper also, so I'll skip this because of the time. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you very much.
thank you very much, Rahul. I think it's a extremely rich paper in terms of its data, its and the analysis and the models that you use. So clearly, there is a lot of information out there which can help us understand the nitty-gritty. However, one still is left with this question. I mean, you concluded by saying that you've left out the suspicion and the apprehensions about Chinese investment. You've not got into the whole issue of how there is a negative perception and so on. But despite all that, you see trade increasing, whether it is in the case of India or the United States and China had a 3-year-long trade war, and yet you see that the trade continues to climb up. So the first question, obviously, that comes out of this whole thing is that what is, I mean, you have said there is trade freedom, investment freedom, the Chinese are interested in profits, but if you go back to that whole debate in India about how this was unsustainable, the trade was highly imbalanced, that this could not go on, and yet we see this going. So ultimately, the central problematic about India-China trade continues. But in any case, this is just something that we've been grappling over for the last decade and a half. Maybe we can discuss this in the Q&A. The last paper is by, again, co-authored by Malini and Varadurga. So let's have that paper now.
Good afternoon.
Dr. Tantra, can you please make the screen, make it full screen?
Am I able to share the screen with everyone?
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you please make it full screen?
Yeah, exactly. Otherwise, it's very difficult to.
Yes. 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 Could I now? I mean, am I able to give the full screen now?
Yes.
Yeah. I have one request. Since my bandwidth is really very bad, since it is raining here and the maintenance work is going on, I'm going to keep my video off. I hope it is acceptable by the chair.
Sure. I think it's more important that your voice is heard.
I know. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, yes.
This paper is co-authored with Dr. Varadurga, but this is a series of the paper that we are. So this is the outline of the paper. So let me begin with giving the context. What exactly made me to think of that? What exactly made us to think of this? As we know, over the year, bilateral trade between India and China
has witnessed a robust growth, and apparently it has invited, or we have to academia where try to see from the different perspective, trend, composition, trade deficit, pharmaceutical export, and name it. We have a number of work on this area, and the projection is concerned, but not much has been explored on how dirty the trade is between these two countries. Kindly note that pollution intensive product trade are synonymously known in the literature as a dirty trade. Why? Because of their high probability, their given high impact they have on the environment is concerned. So that is what we have tried to see in this particular paper. Trade between the two giants are any contributing towards the pollution heaven hypothesis. Now, what is this pollution heaven hypothesis? The concept proposed in 1990 to say how there is a relocation of an industry from the from the developed country to the less developed country, to move according to the environmental policy stringency is concerned. However, we have argued in this paper that the pollution heaven hypothesis need to be revisited and need to re-look into what constitute, because given the current industrialization we have, the trade openness we have, the countries need not physically need to shift their base. All they can do is they can that source certain raw material, intra-industries that we talk about, source certain polluting product from the country. That is what we see that China is trying to do. South Africa, a lot of the natural extraction is happening, whereas mining is something is completely prohibited or carried out with a lot of a restriction. So we have tried in this paper looking that this also facilitate in shifting the EKC, environmental Kuznets curve, in which include EKC export, doing more of a trade in this particular product is concerned. Why? Because the more trade, that is exporting pollution at the cost of the trading partner, that is how it will have an impact on the EKC of the that in the bilateral trade is concerned. So that is what we have tried to take in do in the context of the India and the China. This is the data getting since 1991 for China. So we have to start the reference period from 1992 to related indicators are concerned. We have taken data from the CAIT and as well as data on energy consumption as well. So now how do we define the pollution intensive industries? There are two approaches are available, conventional approach and the modern approach. In the whereas in the study we have followed the modern approach. For that we have gone ahead with this the least with the money and wheeler. Nevertheless, it includes even those products which is even highlighted by the conventional approach. So we have the completely exhaustive list of the industries that are highly pollutant in nature, which are all products are concerned. Straight away move to the results and the discussion. As I already told, this is something is known in the literature that the trade between India and the trade China has increased. Bilateral trade is increasing at a much higher concern. But I think this is something where I need to focus more. I would request all of you to look into this third column, share of a dirty product in India's total export, and the seventh one, share of a dirty product in India's total import. What does this talk about? In the bilateral trade, when we just soon after that our economic liberalization, if I had to take as a starting point as a base, in the bilateral trade, 92.5%, it means almost 90 to 93% of the trade export of in 0.1, and afterward again it started to increase. Now currently whatever trade we are having with the China, 51% of its trade belong to this highly pollution intensive product. Whereas import, the seventh column, if you see, at the time of the base period, 49.48% of our total import from the China bilateral trade, were under pollution intensive, whereas over the year it has reduced and now it is currently 28.65. It means China is between the bilateral trade, they are having the biggest demand. Maybe it is a strategic, happens to be that the major supplier of the pollution intensive. If I have to put it in the EKC framework that I was talking about, China seems to be environmentally benefiting by doing a trade with India, and India seems to be losing environmentally by doing a trade with China is concerned. That is looking into the share. So now, having said this, this also necessitates us to look into the composition, which actually has contributed. So for the latest available year, it is chemical and chemical material, mining ore and from India, but actually I think from the even many developing countries, followed by the petroleum and the coal product. With respect to import, that is, we are importing heavily chemical and chemical material from the China is concerned. Now we also try to see the intra-industry trade. That's what actually we are talking about, pollution heaven, where without shifting the base, actually we can import and we can export the product, right? So in that context, looking into intra-industry trade, not much intra-industry trade percent of our export of pollution intensive product. Over the period, it has increased substantially and steel, chemical, and the chemical material. It means, the trade between India and China within the pollution intensive basket is concerned are moving more towards an intra-industry trade. It means we are having a trade, getting compromised with our environmental concern is concerned, are making compromise with our EKC, environmental Kuznets curve, but having a more of a trade which give a trade benefit, perhaps not that much of an environmental benefit is concerned. Now, having said this, this also necessitates us to look into the comparative advantage. So we try to look into the bilateral comparative advantage. Given the paucity of the time, I'm here not at all explaining index. How did I go ahead? In case if anyone have a question, we can get back during QA. So what is this BRCS score tells us? BRCS score tells us that, both the country, the composition, the product, which is having more than 80% of the bilateral trade within this particular basket, have, are the one which has a more of a comparative advantage. And over the year, the comparative has moved. 1. 2, both at the more disaggregate level have a comparative advantage in completely two different products. So apparently the competition part doesn't come. Like chemical and chemical material India have, at the same time China also does have, but 2-digit, 4-digit, and at the different levels they are altogether different level. Now, having said this, and when
8 minutes are up, so
yeah, I'm 2 more slides. Thank you so much. So having said this, having said that, that post-reform, it has decreased the trade in the pollution intensive. Again, it is increased, so it necessitates us to look into the what actually contributed. We try to look at of an environmental policy stringency index developed by the OECD, and also we try to do correlation with the that bilateral significant, thereby indicating that, as and whenever there is a shift in the policy or stringency index, accordingly the trade has moved. So it actually calls for us to have a more systematic approach. Unlike other, here we cannot say straight away say that, let us have more of that, because we have a comparative advantage, let us improve our competitiveness, which cannot happen because it comes at the cost of an environment. 1. 2, it at the same time we cannot have too much of that environmental stringency we cannot introduce, then we may erode our competitiveness. So when we have a trade and environment together, the policy formula should be entirely different than the formula being suggested here. So we sum up by saying that, between the two, India seems to be the major supplier of the dirty product among the two countries. And environmental perspective, it seems that, China is gaining from trade and India increasing its pollution problem through trading with China. And when going by RCA based upon the bilateral RCA within a time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Malini. Well, I think we heard most of it. Unfortunately, it was broken up in bits and pieces, so we missed quite a bit of it. At least I couldn't hear it properly. But in any case, I think it was a extremely interesting paper, and your conclusion about this trade-off between, trade-off between trade on the one hand and environmental concerns on the other. That's quite, that's really quite interesting to think about, except that now with this climate change issue that is beginning to bear down very heavily on all countries, do you think there's going to be a rethinking going on here? But let me just now call on our two discussants to, within 5 minutes, respond to this fascinating range of themes that have been raised. I would like to just simply record the fact that in Jabin T. Jacob and Venkat Raman, we have two of the most dynamic young scholars in this country, and I am extremely happy to have played some part in their growth. So I'm extremely delighted to ask Jabin to come in first, 5 minutes, and then Venkat. We have, I was stunned. There are almost 200 people listening here, and if I assume that at least 3/4 of them would be young students, I think this has been a tremendous, not just learning about the topics as such, but also about the fact that here we have, a whole host of younger scholars coming into the field, picking up themes which are going outside the traditional strategic foreign policy issues. I think this is something that is very heartening. And so Jabin, over to you now.
Thank you. I think Professor Acharya is being far too modest by saying, when she says that she's only played a very little part. I think Venkat and I will beg to differ. We are where we are because Professor Acharya is, by the way, our supervisor as well. So there's no Dr. Jabin or no Dr. Venkat without Professor Acharya there. So that's 1 minute of my 5 minutes. But let me get quickly to both papers. So I actually agree with Professor Acharya when she said that these are conceptually rich papers, very useful work by Indian scholars, definitely. But what I would suggest, and this is by way of opportunities for improvement, is that I have certain issues with the framing of these papers. I think there was a question asked in the chat whether debt diplomacy narrative sort of means that this is just narrative and it's not reality. I think we have to deal with reality as much as narratives in Western media are important for us to understand. Let's now begin to look at these issues from our perspective. My concern with Sunaina's paper is that it seems to give the impression or sort of give the Chinese a pass, as if none of this is actually true, but this is just a narrative building exercise, which is far from the case. Take one simple point about Hambantota, that it is a 99-year lease. This is a lease that is negotiated by the Chinese and the Sri Lankans, yes? There is no two ways about saying that this lease has been transferred for 99 years to the Chinese. So this is not just narrative, it is a point of fact. But 99 years from the Chinese point of view is very much in keeping with their concepts of the century of humiliation. At the port of Hong Kong, Macau, they were all given away for 99 years to colonial powers. So I think this sort of exercise is not useful unless you also look at this sort of narrative bazi or narrative building from the Chinese side. I think the time has come now to move beyond simply looking only at the West. I understand that there are issues of language competence, access to language, Chinese forces, etc. But today, this really cannot be held as an excuse anymore. There's enough and more material in China. in English, in Chinese, all of it open source that we need to be able to look at and take on board. Now, the fact is that you said, yeah, this debt diplomacy was a term coined by Brahmacharan, who's an Indian, by the way, right? But you also talk about this being reified by the West. But the fact of the matter is the West is dealing with all of these also has these multiple narratives within the West. So it is not a uniform narrative of criticizing China that is going on. And I think you do hint at it. But what is interesting is you also point out that Rotterdam is usually the only voice that talks about the fact that there might be other factors involved. And the fact that she's the only voice, I think, also suggests something, that the debt diplomacy or debt trap narrative is not entirely hook'em, as people are now trying to portray, or at least the Chinese are trying to portray. So I think, frankly, it's difficult to assert a kind of argument in the paper. I think you sort of need to go beyond simply framing in a Foucauldian framework to saying, okay, what is the argument? Is this true? Is this not true? What is the implication? That sort of is not clear. Perhaps it would have been useful if you were actually looking at it. What is this debt trap diplomacy narrative in Indian newspapers, in the Indian media? How does that tie in with other sort of concerns about China and so on? The second paper, frankly, Sinophilia, Sinophobia are not particularly useful frameworks to look at such a complex issue. I mean, there's a whole bunch of problems that are being subsumed under, or issues that are being subsumed under concepts such as sinophilia and sinophobia. And they don't really convey much in terms of analytical depth, let me say. Plus, this problem of sinophobia that you point out is essentially limited to the Western world. UK, Australia, US, those are where most of your examples are from. And African countries or Pakistan actually demanding better governance of projects under BRI is not necessarily the equivalent of sinophobia. I think that needs to be understood. And I saw your references. Frankly, there's only one source or two sources from Namibia and one source from Pakistan. And if you're into an exercise such as this, you need to be able to look at more sources from those countries rather than looking at secondhand information coming in through English media in the West or even in India. So, finally, I don't think the objective of a research paper is to give recommendations to the Chinese or even to the Indians. That's for policymakers to read and glean from your paper. So yeah, let me.
Your 5 minutes are up, and you can take 1 minute, which you said you were.
I'm done. I'm done.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jabin. Venkat, you're up now.
Yeah. Am I audible? Loud and
Yes.
clear? Yeah. So so thanks to ICCS and giving us this opportunity whereby my Guru and Guru Bhai all are in the same panel. I completely endorse whatever Jabin has said about Alka, ma'am. So I've already wasted 30 seconds. So I'll make use of the remaining 30 seconds, 4.5. So, I'll just first I'll talk about Malini's and Varadurga's paper. They have very, rightly and been spot on in terms of identifying a very critical, research gap. One of the most important things when we are doing academic work is to find out a gap in the existing literature. So this dirty trade, area of work is very, very critical. But as they have, they have said that intra-industrial, trade, that is something which is necessitating a revisiting of this whole pollution haven thesis. Again, a very, very interesting insight. But then, they also come to this conclusion whereby they say that who is at loss? India is at loss, China is at, advantage, etc., etc. But my, question is, and this is to some of the other people also who are looking into this area of research, that, yeah, this is given, but what are the choices India is having given its own record? How do we basically confront that kind of a situation? Our record is not very great either. That is number one. And number two, given again the certain kind of momentum, as Rahul's paper points out, between bilateral trade which has come, how and to what extent we are in a position to pick and choose. Are the Chinese going to be, which they are going to be sure, they are going to, bring in certain kinds of ifs and buts and have developed those kind of linkages in other aspects of our trade with them. And then again, to what extent, we are, suffering, India is suffering. This is one part. Second part is, when it comes to the race to the bottom thesis, this is the same thing which we are talking about in sweatshops in the international business. Again, there is a race to the bottom. And when we talk about race to the bottom, we have semi-authoritarian, governments in different parts of the world who attract international businesses for their own economies, provide very conducive conditions for FDI and other kinds of investments and trade. And so therefore there is a race to the bottom. But how do democracies like India deal with, a certain kind of a situation whereby the state is again limited in terms of what options it exercises vis-a-vis the non-state actors like media and the civil society organizations? And then how does this basically, influence this whole pollution heaven thesis? If you are able to look into that, that is something, which will be great. I'm not very sure whether that is a focus of it, but I think, as you go forward in this research, this might be one interesting way of looking at things. In the final, I'm looking at your paper because your voice was also not very clear in between. The final sentence is, based on our analysis, we are unable to conclude who is exploiting whom. This needs further investigation. I would, and I'm sure many others also would join me in trying to, given that you have done a certain kind of empirical study, what are the terms and conditions on which, who is exploiting whom, and, how do we get out of it? To what extent India has this kind of an option to delink, its, pollutant related, trade aspect with other aspects of the bilateral trade. This is something, which we need to look at. Now, coming to the second paper, Rahul and Praveen's paper, one of the things I would like to, talk about straight away is that, you speak about, India, Chinese business interest in India. You also point out that how political, factors are very, very critical. But in your literature review, you have gone to a certain kind of strategy and international business kind of a lit review, which seems to be a misfit in terms of the paper. Second is, you also dedicated a significant section of your paper to what China has done in South Asia, Africa, and some other parts. By the time you actually come to India, you are not devoting adequate space. Now, you're saying that, your graphs show that bilateral trade has been growing, but in terms of volume, it might be growing, but there has been a significant dip in the last 1 or 2 years. And even if I'm looking at the volume, I think we need to take this with a pinch of salt, because many of the things are those projects which were started a few years back. So once, this phase comes to an end, how do India and China deal with each other in the post, June 15th scenario, which we are talking about, where it is going to be increasingly impossible to, de-link politics and economics here. So are we basically going to be in a situation where, US and China have got a slugfest, and due to the increasing, monitoring of Chinese investments in US, including venture capital and all, where the Americans have forced the Chinese to crowd out and go to Israel and other parts of the world? Are we also going to follow the same path? After COVID has broken out and after, this boundary dispute has happened, or, we will be able to graduate to a certain kind of bilateral relationship like one which China and Japan has. So you have political disputes, but at the same time, economy and political, there has to be a certain kind of decoupling between those two aspects. Where is India figuring here in between? Are we going to afford the China-US kind of a model, or, we are going to basically be having the kind of maturity whereby we'll have this kind of a relationship whereby we are able to keep our economics and politics, different. So that is something, which I would like you to, throw more light on. Again, you have said that, foreign policy, the bilateral trade in the context of both these countries are more determined by other strategic and political factors. What are those factors? I don't see that coming out much given, this. So I would like some of these aspects to be woven into the paper right now before it actually takes a better shape. Just to conclude in the context of both the papers, and this is not, I use this as an opportunity to reach out to some others also. When we were doing PhD, it was a very tedious process where each and every word had to go through. Everyone else can detect your mistakes except the one who is writing actually. But now you have things like Grammarly.com. There are so many software programs which help you do a very clean job before actually submitting. So I expect all our, colleagues, the juniors here who we are talking about, not that we are perfect, but it will be great if we are able to bring in a more serious kind of approach when we are submitting papers, because in the context of both the papers, I could see that there are a lot of cleaning up that was desired. And at a conference like this, not only this, anywhere else, it gives wrong signaling if, this kind of submissions are, submitted in conferences. It's all fine within the family. It is fine. We are all.
Okay. Thanks, Venkat. I think, thank you very much. I think there's some very useful issues that have been raised by both the discussants. Now, the pattern that we have is that 2 minutes are given to all the paper presenters. If they want to respond to something which the discussants have raised, and then there are a few questions in the chat box also. So just to take stock of what, and some of them have been rather serious issues that have been raised by the discussants. So if you want to respond, do so one by one, in the same order, and then we will bring up the questions. So Sunaina, you want to? Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Dr. Jacob, for your comments. They're very, very useful, very helpful in thinking about my research. And thank you, Captain Kiran, for your question as well in the chat box. There's just one thing that I would like to respond to here, which is giving China a free rein in my paper, basically. And this is something I've thought about while in the process of my research and writing as well.
Just to clarify, at the moment you're responding to the discussants.
Right.
We're going to open up the floor when, other questions which have been in the chat box will be raised.
Right. Okay, noted, ma'am. Thank you. This is regarding how China is also trying to control the narrative and my focus towards the West in general. And yes, it's absolutely true. There is no excuse for not having language competency and all of the material. I'm not going to be making any of these excuses today. It is more, so what I like about my critical discourse analysis method is it allows me to sort of introspect my positionality in this entire web of professionals who are looking towards China. And here in my research, I particularly am interested about looking at how there's this network of think tanks, academics, policymakers, elected representatives, all of whom are talking to each other through the media. And media, of course, is a part of this whole nexus and where I stand in that. And when I came into China studies in 2018, that was a time at which the wolf warrior diplomacy was this huge thing that was being written about and spoken about. And that is when I sort of started becoming interested in how a narrative is generated. And when I say Tetra Diplomacy discourse, I no means want to say that it is just a discourse and there is no fact to this. It's just that evaluating the facts is outside the scope of my research at the moment. I would love to collaborate with people who are willing to do that part of the research. I'm more interested in media analysis, so that is the work that I do personally. And in thinking about how China studies is dealt with and how Chinese narrative is dealt with, there's a lot of work on what the coinage of win-win partnerships mean, what South-South cooperation means, and a lot of this. And in that context, I was interested in looking at how the West is sort of creating this narrative about China. And here again, there was this really interesting feedback I got from AICCS when I submitted my paper, which is in exploring the linkages between India and Western media, because as Professor Jacob, as Dr. Jacob pointed out, that the term
Sunaina,
was
you
coined
are,
by...
sorry, I have to interrupt you. You exceeding your time. You just have to respond very briefly because we've got 4 other people,
Right.
and then the
Okay.
Q&A. So,
Right.
you know.
Okay, I'll just take like 30 more seconds. It was coined by an Indian political strategist. So yes, I'm extremely interested in exploring those linkages as well. Thank you. Thank you so much for your comments.
I would like to thank Professor Jacob for the great insights. Coming to the xenophobia thing, I was especially mindful of the fact that as Western media is highly critical of China, so I kept the xenophobia element and the causes for that in Western societies to authoritarian system of China. And for the, I have elaborately mentioned in my paper the reasons of xenophobia in Asia, Africa, and Central Asian republics is economic invasion of China. I have mentioned the examples of Brazilian economy where Chinese are capturing soybean farming, and in Argentina where they are capturing pig farm industry, and causing displacement of local jobs and deindustrialization of their economy. And also in countries of Indonesia and Singapore, where ethnic Chinese make a big majority, but still they are feared, and there is element of xenophobia. There's a whole section of xenophobia and its causes in Africa. I couldn't highlight those much in the PPT, but I made it a point that xenophobia's causes are clearly and in detail is explained for every continent for that matter. But I will try more to be...
just take 30 seconds. Thank you. My point is not about the coverage of xenophobia. My point is that it's calling the xenophobia is a mistake because it tends to be whitewashed into one single category of the reasons being the same. So that categorization is the problem, is what I was saying, right?
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, I think Rahul could come in.
Sorry. Yeah. So, okay. Thanks, Shri. I think you could reflect on that. I think it's there's an important conceptual or rather methodological issue that he has raised. So, Rahul, do you want to respond to?
Yes, ma'am. I would like to respond to the discussion, Dr. Venkat.
Yes.
So he was talking, raising question on.
Oh, sorry. My apologies. Malini is supposed to come in first. Malini, is she on? I thought she had.
Yes, I'm. Can I go?
So Malini, yes, you go ahead. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Venkatraman. It's, indeed very insightful. Let me start by saying that these are the industries that have a significant contribution towards employment, output, and the and as well as investment is concerned. So the straightaway policy will not come into. So the question of what kind of option we have, what position we are there. I think there were current Honorable Prime Minister Manmohan Singh talking about reducing the carbon emission and everything through clean energy technologies in this industry pitching. We are not at all arguing for either to close this industry or stop the trade, but having a more clean energy technologies in this industry so that employment, output, and investment doesn't get compromised, and at the same time we move up in the environmental quotient curve is concerned. And I'm sorry that for the last sentence we did revise the write-up post submission, and in the PPT, I hope PPT was clear. We did not sum up with that, we are not sure who is exploiting. From the data, it is very clearly evident that, India is the major supplier and China seems to be having a major demand is concerned. So I think, one more point about intra-industry trade. We did not say that, through intra-industry trade, we are trying to revisit the concept of the pollution heaven hypothesis. All we are trying to say that, the pollution heaven hypothesis need to be reconfigured in the current context of the industrialization and as well as the trade liberalization, where you can procure the polluting product without actually shifting the base of the industry, but just shifting the base of the final output from the one place to another. The conceptual framework in the revised write-up that we are bringing out, I hope it will be able to address it much better. But thank you so much for your observation. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Magni. It's good to know that your paper did not end on a vague note. So, Rahul, would you like to respond?
Yes, ma'am. The first issue that was, what are the other factors that is responsible for or determining factor for Chinese investment in India? We have actually captured in this these issues in our econometric model. Apart from the FDI policy or investment policy, there are a lot of factors that influence any investor from any country to invest in another country. So, like big market size, what is the if it is a app-based investor like mobile app-based organization, so they would also like to see what are the mobile penetration, internet penetration, how much is the tech-savvy population in that particular country. If you want to do a business, what is the total market size, what is the income of that country, so GDP or per capita income, so what is the affordability of the consumers of that particular market. So all these things are captured in the econometric model, so which are beyond any for investment policy, which doesn't have direct relationship with the investment policy. And second, more about this, what kind of relationship we are going ahead, or India-China relationship, whether it is US-China model or it is US-China-Japan model. I don't believe that we can afford the similar relationship with US-China. India cannot replicate the same model with China, because China is much mature economy, US is much mature economy, and our dependence on China for lot many things, which actually we need to import a lot many things from them. We do not have that big size investors which China can afford, like Tencent, Alibaba. They have huge or deep pocket, which India do not have. So we cannot have go into a kind of trade or economy war with China. So we need to keep both the relationship apart, like foreign policy, foreign relationship, and trade relationship in two different zones. Like it should be like China and Japan format that Dr. Venkat was raising. Yes, where they may be in not so good diplomatic relationship, but there will be the trade and investment will flourish between these things, two nations. So this model, I believe, will be better suits in China for India. So these are two issues. And for the questions that
okay, so thanks, Rahul. I'll just we just have about 4 questions in the chat box. I'm just going to quickly read them out. But just to respond to what you were saying, I think Venkat's point essentially was about the mechanisms that would come into play to keep politics and economics in one sense segregated, even though it is likely to, like the point I was making about how in the immediate context you may have negative fallout from certain developments, resulting in tactical adjustments in policy. So you ban 550 apps and so on. But the question really is that, is there any point at which, despite these ups and downs, a trade in one sense is insulated from the overall relationship? So I think that was the thing that Venkat was moving towards. Okay, let me quickly get to the questions. One is for Sunaina. Is debt trap a fact or is it a generated narrative? I think this is something that Javin had raised in his points. To both Shri and Sukalpa, will the use of, okay, now here's an interesting question. Automatic data scrapper, I don't know what this is, appropriate natural language processing algorithm. So will these things make segregating the narrative and research quick and easy? So basically, new tools to look at the data out there. So that's the next question is the attitude of the Chinese traders, China in the nation they invest. is vastly different than India's, and that is the cause of the phobia as I view it. Would you analyze this? Okay, that's the second question. Who is it from? No, not too sure. The names have not been given. And Rahul, the point comes back again. I think almost everybody who was following your paper with great interest faced this question, that despite the boycott China, which trended, total trade volume has reached 100 billion. Trade deficit has decreased. So how do you see the future of bilateral ties? And I think there was one more question which came in from Vaishakhi, who said, according to some European news reports, Italian foreign minister highlighted their relations with US more important than with China. So what will be the future situation of Italy with US and China? Italy, okay. So these are the questions, and you have 2 minutes again each. We will try and wrap this up by 1:20. So let's go backwards. Rahul, you've been speaking, so you are still warm. So why don't you take up the narrative once again? You are muted, Rahul.
Yeah, I have actually tried to answer the questions in the chat box itself. So there are two questions actually. One on whether I have used the wireless model or not. Yes, I have used a wireless model, and I have also written this thing. And for this, why China, in spite of this strategic or the diplomatic tussles, why our trade is increasing? Yes, our trade is increasing, and it has touched 100 billion USD. And why we have a huge dependence on China. There we are boycotting Chinese investors. There are organizations which are coming out with rallies and all this, and boycott China and all these things. But this cannot help until we develop our domestic industries. Sectors like pharmaceutical industry, where we are producing a lot of medicines, but the API or the raw materials we are importing from China. We are producing mobile phones, but for the mobile phone chips and all the raw materials, motherboard, we are importing from China. We are producing AC or this refrigerators, manufacturing these things, but the main component, this we are importing from China. So like we can, or moreover, the small quantity or small value products, whether it is a doll or any toy and things, we do not have that industry that big or farms which can produce in such a big volume, so that to get the economics of scale and offer it to the consumer at a reduced price. If for example, if you are producing a toy in India, we are producing a toy in India and we are importing it same from China, so import is much lower. So if you cannot ask your consumer to pay higher for your domestic product, and when it is available from the Chinese market, the much lower price. So basically, because of the price, because of the price that we are, and we do not have also developed our own domestic market, so we either will buy it from China or any other where, we'll buy it from somewhere when we are not producing itself in our country. So if we are getting it from at a cheaper price from China, so it definitely we'll buy it from China. So this is the thing, and just boycott and all these things are gimmick. This then we have no this thing in boycotting.
Okay. Well, yeah, the boycotting issue is opens up another set of issues. So let's leave it for the moment. But Captain Khankoje has rephrased this question. He's saying attitude of the Chinese traders or China in the nation they invest is vastly different than India's. Essentially, he wants you to make a comparison between the Chinese and Indian attitude towards investment, and therefore his argument, I suppose, is that China's attitude causes phobia, whereas India's attitude doesn't. Would you have any opinion on this?
Yes. So when Chinese companies...
Oh, Shri, sorry, Shri, this is... yeah, I think this is for me. Okay, yeah. So Rahul, would you like to also say something on this, because your paper was touching on this, and then Shri can take over.
Yes. Because India's investment, Chinese investments are, I believe, are two different kind natures. Because while Chinese are investing, or the debt trap, all these things are going on, is because China basically try to invest in a critical resources of that country. They try to give you so much of fund and ask you to produce or extend your infrastructure in a poor countries like Nepal or Pakistan, which is actually they are investing in their critical. After that point, but all this debt trap, as other speakers have also talked, it's just an assumption. Apart from Sri Lanka, we do not have that much concrete evidence of supporting this assumption that yes, they will capture your resources. So
Okay.
yes.
All right, thanks. Okay, Shri, up to you now.
Yes, so I would like to say, though India is a budding investor in Africa, I'm giving the example of Africa, but Chinese companies, there are about, as per McKinsey report, there are about 10,000 Chinese companies in Africa today, and they are working in all 53, 54 African countries. So when they come, the Chinese companies ask for bringing their own laborers with their own technology. So they come with investment, but also with their own companies and their own laborers. That is causing the displacement of local laborers and the antagonism against Chinese. So that is different from India, because India does not have that much capability in terms of money and investment as per now.
And they're heavily investing in South Africa due to the natural resource availability which South Africa have.
Yes.
And so obviously they want to capture that natural resource availability which Africa have.
The land grab and resource grab is the main thing with China.
Okay, and do you have, Shri, any view on those automatic data scrapper and the natural language processing algorithm?
Well, ma'am, I can say that AI has made advances in these areas, and softwares like NLP can be used to detect the exact meaning of the words. But in areas of linguistics and community dynamics, the research is yet to be done, and it has to be explored further.
Right, right. And as Colonel Venkat has also added, that they are useful, but they are still evolving, and they can create more. In fact, from some experience that I have with some submissions, they can prove to be far more counterproductive than productive. So there are a whole set of issues. So still no getting away from the blood, sweat and tears that goes into research. Okay, you can't just simply have these tools making life easy for you. So yes, now Malini, do you want to come in? Or let's go to Sunaina first, Sunaina, and then we'll end with Malini. Sunaina, you want to respond?
Professor Acharya, I didn't had any question, so I don't know.
Okay, fine, then you can. Sunaina, you want to come in with that first question that had come to you?
I think I
you
answered it partially during the
but
discussion.
Maybe you can say something else to conclude.
Thank you so much. In terms of me analyzing debt trap diplomacy as a discourse, and I want to emphasize this again, I'm not taking away from, none of my research touches upon whether it's true, whether China is actually supporting projects that are unsustainable to push vulnerable economies into debt distress. I haven't done any research on this, and I'm really interested to read a lot of research on this, in fact. My interests lie in media discourses, basically. And I believe that even if all of this is 100% true, even then the way in which it is spoken about in the media generates a kind of understanding of Chinese infrastructure lending, not only among common ordinary readers, but also among these area studies groups or these expert groups that are now very much in creation in the neoliberal economies that we're in. There's a lot of money to be made if you're an expert on China. And so in the ways in which this is being discussed in the media, I feel like an analysis of just how the media is covering it via its articles. Now there are graphic explainers and a lot of other forms of information dissemination. I think that can also make an interesting study parallel to studying the actual impact of the loans and the debt that is there in the global south.
I couldn't agree with you more, Sunaina. I think the importance of media projection is a very critical factor, which shapes our perceptions and our attitudes. And even though we may not be able to always pinpoint with accuracy, it's quite clear that these are somewhere going and shaping the general miasma, the general mindsets. And it's not for no reason that the Chinese have over the last decade and a half begun to invest heavily, hugely into expanding their media network. The CNNs and the BBCs and all the rest of them. So the Chinese come out with this, that it's the Chinese media which will tell the Chinese story. Right. And so you can see that CGTN, and both in terms of print and of course now it's all about electronic media, they are investing hugely. And you have these correspondents spread all over the world telling the Chinese story as it is. So I agree with you that the study of media from a theoretical conceptual perspective, discourse analysis. Okay, so now we have wrapping up this. Thank you all very much. I think this has been a very, very rich session. The takeaways for all of us should be that the themes are so important, current, so dynamic. They're undergoing a lot of shifts and changes even as we talk. And yet, as scholars, it is our job to move away from the hurly-burly of the current events and take a step back and try and explore the structures, the factors which are actually bringing about a certain kind of which are shaping developments in a certain way. So while the tactical aspects tend to grab more eyeballs, it is the more serious work in terms of understanding, deeper understanding, moving away from the black and white, because very often the tendency is to just take these views and simply build your entire argument on and what comes out clearly from all the papers is that only a deeper study can actually help you understand why and how certain narratives come up, or why and how certain perceptions come up, whether it is to do with the whole question of debt trap, or whether it is to do with sinophilia, phobia, whether it is to do with trade. I mean, the last two, the two papers on trade showed, in fact, how actually attitudes are also shaping the way in which trade is being shaped. So yes, a lot of interesting suggestions. Please, all the paper presenters, take note of the excellent points raised by our discussants, work on those papers, and if need be, come back to us for further inputs into the finalization of your papers, because I do believe that improving these papers would help you actually produce far more significant kind of contributions in your chosen area. So thank you all very much, and thank you all to the audience. 50 of them have run away for lunch, but nearly 200 people were here, and I think you all got a great audience, and I hope the audience here reaches out to you people and takes some good. Brings about some good interactions, and after all, this is what the whole AICCS is about. We want to create this network of scholars talking amongst each other. So thank you all very much once again. I am truly delighted to have been part of this session. Now, thank you. let the organizers take over, please.
Thank you, ma'am. Let me conclude the session by thanking the chair, Professor Acharya, the discussants, Dr. Jabinti Jacob and Dr. G. Venkatraman, for their detailed comments on the papers. I'm sure the authors will find the comments helpful before they publish their papers. I would like to inform our participants that the video recordings of all our sessions will be available on the ICCS YouTube channel. We shall now break for lunch and resume at 2 p.m. for our next thematic session on the topic, Society and Politics in China. Please note that the meeting room will remain open for the next session. We would encourage you to stay back for the next session